Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, New Canaan Society, New Canaan chapter, for this opportunity. Special thanks as well to Paul, your chapter leader here, gracious host. I was with him last night, and I'm an active member of the NCS Manhattan chapter, and so it is indeed a privilege for me to come here to the founding chapter to be able to experience where it all started. I had an opportunity a few years back to have lunch with Jim Lane, and sort of got to know him and the story of New Canaan Society, New Canaan, and how it all got started. So it is very special to be here today. I'm not a stranger to this area. I lived for many years in Westchester County, and I have 3 kids, as Peter mentioned, and 2 of them, my two daughters and 1 son, the 2 daughters both attended Sacred Heart Greenwich. So I spent a lot of time, more times than I can recall, in this area, going to birthday and graduation parties. So I know Fairfield County well. Are there any other Sacred Heart dads in the house? No? Okay. Well, we have an annual father-daughter dance, so I thought if there were, I would have met some of you there. Today, I'd like to talk about an important topic. I've entitled it, Add Virtue Above All. And it's important because the prevailing discord in America, so evident in social media, in newsrooms, in classrooms, even in street violence and political discourse, it stems from a loss of foundational virtues in our nation. And we need to add those back. And it's a biblical mandate. 2 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 5. It says, make every effort to add to your faith virtue. And then it goes on, and to your virtue, knowledge, and to your knowledge, perseverance, and to your perseverance, self-control, godliness, and brotherly kindness, and love. But the first thing that you add to your faith is virtue. And so when we think about we as men of God and the calling that we have on our lives and how we grow in grace, we need to keep the priority that God has set. He says, make every effort to add to the faith. We have the faith, but the first thing that we add is what? Virtue. Is what? Virtue. And that's the thrust, the theme of my talk today. And I want to do it both in terms of my own story, but also in the context of the American story. Some of you have seen this. It's about my new book. It's a Vigorous Virtues. And it's a different kind of historical devotional book in a historical context where I look to American history in order to draw life lessons and success principles, biblically based, that will help us live our best life. So I have some historical examples as well as my own example to talk about adding to our faith virtue. I first learned about adding virtue when I was in Harlem. Peter told you about my story many years ago. I didn't grow up in Harlem. I actually grew up in Virginia, then spent some years as a teenager in Sweden, and then moved back to Westchester County, off to the Ivy League, Cornell, and then Harvard. But it was when I was at Harvard Law School that God placed on my heart a vision go to Harlem, build my kingdom. So when I first heard that vision, some of you know the biblical account of Jonah. When he heard the vision about going to Nineveh, he went the other way, ended up in the belly of a whale. So I had some belly of the whale experiences, but eventually submitted to God's call, moved to Harlem. This was the 1980s, opened up a homeless shelter. And it was one day at that shelter, I was talking to one of the residents, called him Brother Booth. And I was talking to Brother Booth, and he was asking me some questions about my background. I was telling him, and then he tells me, he says, well, Rev, they call me Rev. He said, Rev, I went to college too. And I was a little surprised because Booth came off, in his dress and his talk and his attitude, like somebody who hadn't been to college. So I said, oh, really? I said, where did you go? He says, UCLA, which surprised me even more. And I said, really? He says, yes, Rev, you got to understand, I went to the university on the corner of Lenox Avenue. What Booth was doing was making a point contrasting my book knowledge with his street knowledge. Both are important, but it's that contrast that he was making clear to me that emphasized that adding virtue is more important, right? The biblical term says in that text, you add virtue and then knowledge. And I understood that. Street book knowledge, okay, but we've got to add the virtue. And so we were committed in that shelter to digging into God's Word. Each and every morning, we got into God's Word, and out of that experience, we began to draw these virtues. And the men were encouraged to live those out. And we had many, many transformational experiences in the lives of these men. And I want to highlight for you this morning 3 of those virtues. I call them the 3 C's: courage, compassion, and civility. In my book, there are 12 virtues, one for each month. And we don't have time to get into that today. But I do want to highlight 3 of these virtues, starting with courage. And I want to go to a historical figure. This is going back now to the 19th century. This is in 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg, the pivotal conflict of the Civil War. A Hispanic American soldier named Joseph De Castro was involved in that battle, and he was the flag bearer for the Massachusetts Regiment. And on the last day of the Battle of Gettysburg, De Castro, the flag bearer, took this flag, ran across the battlefield, and turned this flag into a weapon in order to attack the flag bearer who was carrying it for the Confederacy, the Virginia Regiment. And he attacked this flag bearer, was able to grab the Virginia flag, run back across the battlefield, and present it to his general. This was an inspirational moment in that battle from De Castro, and it helped the Union win that day, and the Confederacy really never recovered from that moment in the Civil War. And so the first point I want to make about courage, being courageous, is that you have to be pugnacious. You have to be willing, to fight, to seize your battlefield, to make a bold move. De Castro did it, and it's important to understand and learn from that lesson that life is a battle for territory, and we have to fight to seize that territory. In any number of ways, gentlemen, we have to fight. If you don't fight, for truth, falsehood will take your territory. If you don't fight for vigor, laziness will take that territory. If you don't fight for peace and calm, conflict and discord will take that territory. If you don't fight for prosperity and productivity, poverty will take that territory. We have to fight for that territory. You have to seize your battlefield. You have to be pugnacious. But also to be courageous, you have to be prayerful. When I was at Hawk Homes, one of the things that we did in coming together was we prayed both at night as a group of men and in the morning, first thing, as a group of men. And I call this inner courage, because you have to be willing to let go and let God. You have to be willing to say, Lord, I can't handle this, so I'm willing to put this in your hands. There comes a point when you do everything you can, but you have to be humble enough. That's that inner courage. And say, no, God, I'm going to let you do it. So when we think about being courageous, be pugnacious, you have to fight for the territory, and you have to be prayerful. You have the inner courage to be humble enough to turn it over to God. So that's the first C, courage. But then we go to compassion. And I want to go further back in American history for our example here. This is now to the 18th century. 1776. In August of 1776, this was after the Declaration of Independence already been signed, Thaddeus Kosciuszko, he was a Polish-Lithuanian military engineer. He decided to leave his country and travel here to America, it wasn't America back then, to the colonies, to get involved in the Revolutionary War effort. Joined the Continental Army and began to build fortifications. In fact, he had such talent that he was assigned to be at the Delaware River to build the defenses to keep the British Army from getting to Philadelphia. And he distinguished himself there, that he was set to West Point and build the fortifications up the Hudson. There's a statue to Kosciuszko up there commemorating the great work that he did. Some of you may know the name because the Kosciuszko Bridge connecting Queens and Brooklyn is named after this man. So he was a great military man, so much so he was made a brigadier general by the end of the war. But we're talking about compassion. So what Kosciuszko did was he took his back pay from the war. He bought 500 acres of land with it in the Ohio Territory. And years later, when he was heading back to Europe, he gave the instructions that he wanted this land sold, and the proceeds of that land sale used in order to buy freedom for slaves. His compassion expressed itself by his giving, but he gave in a particular way. He gave to his beneficiaries by guiding them. And he left instructions when he made this gift. And this is the principle here. You have to guide your beneficiaries. So this is what he wrote. He said, that is to say, each should know, talking about the slaves that he was leaving the money to, before the duty of a citizen in the free government to have good and human heart, sensible for the sufferings of others. Each must be married and have 100 acres of land, with instruments, cattle for tillage, and know how to manage and govern it as well. to know how to behave to neighbors, always with kindness and ready to help them. To themselves, they must be frugal. To their children, give good education, and in gratitude to me, to make themselves as happy as possible. So he gave, but he gave with guidance. And you hear a lot of times that, okay, we need to give with no strings attached. But I want you to understand today that just like Kukusko here, he gave in an important way to establish freedom for slaves, but there were some strings attached to that. And it's important as we give with guidance and we give with accountability because we want to give in ways, we want to exercise our compassion in ways that helps the individuals that we're extending this compassion to grow beyond the need for that assistance. That's what Kukusko did. Similarly, when I was at Hawk Homes, helping the homeless, we had what we called the daily plan of action. Yes, you had the shelter. Yes, you had the food. You had clothing there. But it was something that you needed to do each and every day in order to improve your situation. I call this effective compassion, right? You're reaching out in a way that, makes a difference to transform a life. So each day, the man had to go out, stick with that plan of action, and come back and give account. Did you go to your AA meeting? Did you go to that job interview? Did you go to that GED class? And each and every day, there was a difference made in that person's life as they stuck to that plan of action and showed that they had the accountability. So you have to give with guidance. You also have to give in a way, and this is the second point of compassion that shows that you care. I remember this was another brother, Edgar. One night I was having a rough day, and I was actually trying to give him some advice and fell asleep in the middle of the advice. It was one of those moments where, Rev, you okay? And so I said, oh, Edgar, I'm sorry, brother. It's been one of those long days that I'm here with you. And, he says to me, Rev, it's okay. You showed up, and your just being here is enough. Men of God, I have to tell you, sometimes you just got to show up. Just being there for somebody in need, being there for somebody in crisis. And you may not know what to do, what to say, and you pray for that wisdom, but the first step is to make that move, is to be there for someone who's hurting, and by showing up, you speak volumes into that person's life. So that's compassion. We talk about, virtues, started with courage, we went to compassion, and now I want to go to the third C, which is civility. And this is, I'd say, the most important for us right now because we live in a society of diminishing civility. I talked about it earlier with the discord, and it is so important for men of integrity, to step up and to make a difference. I want to go even further back in American history for this example. We started in the 19th century, went to the 18th century. I want to go now to the 17th century. This is 1620. It was a group who left England, referred to by historians as the Pilgrims. They got on the Mayflower, and they were headed to Virginia, but they got redirected as they journeyed across the Atlantic and ended up in the Cape Cod area and had all kinds of challenges with weather, with disease, and in their relationships with the Native Americans who were already there. But there was a leader of the group, William Bradford, who encouraged them to work through all the hardships and stick with the challenge. And there was a Native American leader. His name was Samoset. And Samoset, he learned a little English, and he came and he went to Bradford, and they had some discussion. And they set out some terms to help the civility between the new settlers and the Native Americans. And I want to read just a couple of those terms that they set out many centuries ago so they could figure out how to live together. Bradford recorded these, and he wrote that neither he nor any of his should injure or do hurt to any of their people. He should send to his neighbors, confederates, to certify them of this, that they might not wrong them, but be likewise composed in the conditions of peace. And then finally, and most importantly, he wrote that when their men came to them, they should leave their bows and arrows behind. That they should leave their bows and arrows behind. And this brings me to the life lesson that I want to share about civility. There are actually two. Let go and lean in. Somebody say, let go.
Let go.
Somebody say, lean in.
Lean in.
Starts with letting go of your baggage. And we all have baggage based on who we are, how we were raised, where we were as we were growing up. You might want to call it cultural baggage or sociological baggage, but whatever it is, that's who we are. But just like Bradford and Samoset, they met together and tried to figure out how these two different groups could be civil to one another. We have to leave our cultural bows and our sociological arrows behind. Let go. So I ask you the question this morning, gentlemen, what is it that you have to do to let go of your baggage, that you can connect better with somebody else, particularly others who are deeper, who are different than you? But it only starts with letting go. Then you have to take action. And I call that to lean in, particularly to lean in to reconciliation. Lean in to forgiveness. And that's the hard part. When I was at Hawk Holmes, we had to set up a protocol once a week where we would sit around and we would lean in, and the men were instructed broken relationships. Because if you're homeless, you understand there are broken relationships there. You got no place to go. What are your broken relationships? And what do you have to do to fix them? And those were some of the most difficult discussions that we would have, at the shelter. And we would have to steep them in prayer and in love in order to get the sharing and transparency that was needed. But that's what I'm talking about. You have to lean in for that reconciliation. You have to lean in. That's the work. It's emotional. It's psychological. But most importantly, it's that spiritual work. And if you put that work in, then you will be able to overcome whatever barriers there are, whatever incivility there is in connecting with other people. And so the question then becomes, and this is what I have to raise for you to ponder now, what are those barriers, whether they're inner barrier or external barriers in your life that you have to overcome so that you can lean in and be reconciled with those who are different from you. It's a high standard of civility, but God is calling us to come together. And as I conclude this morning, I want just to encourage each and every one of us as we think about these virtues, from courage to compassion to civility, to add these virtues to our lives. And we can do them, and it's not this theoretical thing. It's something that, we have to practice. We have to live day by day. And this is the start, by coming here, by joining together in fellowship. This is indeed the start. I mentioned earlier, I've written a book. I've talked about 3 of the virtues today. There are actually 12 virtues, one for each month in this book. It actually starts in January with courage. And then February, I go to self-discipline. March is compassion, which we talked about. And then in April, it's perseverance. May, it's teamwork. And then in June, integrity. July, industriousness. August, self-reliance. September, optimism. And then October is purposefulness. And then it ends with civility in November. I talked about civility today. And the most important one I leave to last, which is faith. Right? That's the most important of these. And this book I'm excited about because I really see it as a way for us as men of God, people of God, goes beyond men, to raise a high standard. Remember what Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Let your light so shine before men that they can see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Adding virtue will allow your light to shine, and you'll be a testimony, making a difference, drawing others to the Lord, and building his kingdom. So I do have these out. There's information in here, the website, if you want to go and pre-order the book. I do have a good friend who joined me here today, Sean Isaacs. He's actually helping me with the book. Sean, raise your hand so they know. So this is Sean. Thank you. If you have questions about what I've talked about today or the book, anything, you could certainly feel free to talk to me or to Sean about that. So thank you all for your attention this morning. Glad being with you, and God bless you.